party saying we will pick these ones, I think that would be politicising. To recommend pharmaceuticals that the Cancer Control Agency, no less, is actually chosen as the ones that would make the biggest difference for cancer, I think that is consistent with good practice.
But those medicines were not a cost benefit, it was just looking at effectiveness. So how can you possibly say that you have enough money to even fund those when the Cancer Control Agency wants them or not?
Well, again, ultimately, all funding decisions come down to having enough money, so you're going to have to apply cost-benefit analysis. I just make the point that the Cancer Control Agency is not a political agency, it's an agency that cares deeply about cancer and seeks to understand which of the new medications out there are going to be most helpful to people with cancer.
Totally, but by making that promise, and if you don't have extra funding to put in, because you're levelling out the fiscal cliff, right? So you're funding Pharmac to you can fund the medicines it's already funding.
Yeah.
If you're not additionally funding to that, then some decisions need to be made within that Pharmac budget as to what drops off the list to fund these promised cancer drugs that National has promised.
Yeah, I think what's clear is that we are not going to interfere in the way that Pharmac makes their decisions. We are only going to tell them this is their budget, and within that budget they must optimise according to their formulae. The way that coalition commitment will be accommodated is going to depend on future discussions, but right now we've inherited a fiscal cliff where we have to save the furniture. I mean, this is real. Pharmac would have been basically choosing not which new things to fund, but which things that people are currently getting they should take away. That is totally unacceptable, and so when you inherit about $450 million of fiscal cliff every year, that's got to be your priority.
Is that fair though? Are you committed to putting more funding in to make that coalition commitment to fund those specific cancer drugs?
Well, that's going to be a cabinet decision and a budget decision. It's not something that I personally choose. My commitment is to make sure that Pharmac is properly funded and has increasing funding each year as the coalition agreements with National and New Zealand First State. We are fulfilling that coalition commitment. When we get more fiscal headroom, I'm sure there'll be more discussions about how we manage to fund more cancer drugs. It's also critical that within this budget allowance there will be room for modest increases in the number of drugs that are funded and the number of indications or conditions that they're funded for.
In terms of this new allocation,
was that you wanted the Pharmac model wasn't sort of fit for purpose. So one of the big things that's been a problem with it over recent years is it has really recognised disorders. So it's tried to fund the most amount of drugs for the most amount of people. Will you specifically look at that aspect of the Pharmac model?
Well, yes, although I need to be clear that my role as the Minister, I appoint the board, I give them a letter of expectations, and I set out what I hope that they will do, but the actual implementation is up to the board and the management. It's one step removed from politics, but my indications are very clear. We need to work on a culture of partnership rather than adversity. Pharmac needs to work on how it can optimise the funding of medical technologies rather than economise within a fixed budget. We need to effectively help them make better budget bids. We need to work out whether Pharmac is in the medicine business or the technology business or both, but we're not going to have this hybrid situation where Te Whatu Ora does most of the technologies but Pharmac does some. Those are the kind of general directions that we'll be offering them.
in terms of this new allocation, just to be really clear, that it won't create a fiscal cliff in 5 years' time. You expect it to stay at that level at least, if not increase in the out years?
Well, a fiscal cliff by definition is when the funding drops off within the 4-year forecast period. So certainly for the period that we're forecasting, through to 27, 28 and out years, it will remain at the level that we're projecting. There's no drop-off in our budget like there was with the previous government's budget. Obviously what will happen in 28, 29, 30, that's outside our current forecast period, and who knows, it may be outside some people's political lives too, but to the extent that I'm involved, I'll certainly be advocating not just to maintain, but to increase Pharmac's budget, because I believe the medical technology revolution that is occurring right now and around the world will leave New Zealand behind and actually make our healthcare system less productive if we are not getting access to the kinds of medical technologies that other countries take advantage of.
Labor did sink huge sums into Pharmac in 2022. Is there a figure that you would be comfortable with, or like a percentage of GDP or something like that you're working towards for Pharmac funding going forward?
It's a good question. I mean, you heard Malcolm Mulholland saying that the OECD average is 1.4% of GDP, New Zealand at 0.4%. That is a big gap. We are not going to increase Pharmac funding by 1% of GDP. That's almost $3 billion. That would triple our budget. We're not going to do that in the immediate future. What we are going to do is change the way that Pharmac makes budget bids in such a way that Pharmac can start saying to the rest of government, look, if you gave us more money, we could save you money here or there. Classic example, a working example of that with drugs that have already been funded. For example, since Trikafta's been funded, lung transplants in New Zealand have fallen off a cliff. Now, I don't know how much a lung transplant costs, but I'm guessing it's one of the most expensive things the New Zealand healthcare system can do. Similarly, ustekinumab has saved young people with IBD from having serious and destructive surgeries on their intestines. If you look at something like MS, a degenerative illness, if you can keep people in work and feeling well, then that can have major savings for the government. And I don't think that we actively think about how funding pharmaceuticals can actually save the government money overall. We tend to discover these things after the fact, almost by accident.
And that's not part of Pharmac's formula at the moment. So is that something you would like to see in their funding formula?
Well, it's absolutely right. I mean, right now, under the Health Act, Pharmac is there to secure for eligible persons as many pharmaceuticals as it can within a given budget. I think what we need to move towards is asking the question, how much can Pharmac save the rest of government if more pharmaceuticals were funded, and find a way to make that pitch without creating political questions over whether a particular drug should be funded. Sorry, yeah.
Last one, and that's just on the 15 medicines, cancer medicines that we've said we're going to fund. Is that not putting the cart before the horse a little bit? We've sort of shown our hand in negotiations. You know, those companies could end up charging us more than they would because they know we have to buy them. What do you think about that?
Well, like I say, I mean, Pharmac for a long time have been very good at playing the game of negotiating with pharmaceutical companies.
But this time we've shown our hand, so...
Well, of course, they don't know exactly which ones are a priority or which ones may remain a priority, because what you've got to remember is that the Cancer Control Agency itself is updating its list. So I don't think that it's that black and white that it impairs our negotiating position. Sorry, one second.
Might we see an update on that list? Because that is, you're right, it has been reviewed.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm not directly responsible for updating it. That's the Cancer Control Agency, but I'm sure they'd be happy to tell you about their work.
So when you say we're not going to get near the OECD average for a long time, or I think ever, how do you explain saying in there that we're going to move from the back of the pack to the front of the world?
Well, there's other ways that you can be at the front of the world. For example, how quickly do we assess for consent and for funding? How responsive are we to new technologies? How responsive are we to rare disorders? It's always going to be the case that New Zealand is going to have smaller budgets than other countries that are larger and richer, perhaps even as a percentage of GDP. However, if we want to start taking steps, we've got to accept the model we have. It was born in bad times. It was born in 1991 in the middle of a recession, much worse than anything we face now. It was designed to economise. It was designed, I think, to take an adversarial approach to the rest of the sector, and it's been very successful at that, but I don't think that's what we need in the modern world where medical technologies have a lot more to offer and are a lot more diverse.
Isn't it also the case that we always could spend more on health?
Surely you can't be giving patients expectations that we will be at the front of the world as far as medicines and providing those life-saving medicines, life-changing medicines, if we are not at least keeping up with the average.
Well, I completely agree with that, and the objective of starting to evaluate could a pharmaceutical save more money elsewhere is a way of having the pharmaceutical budget negotiated against the rest of the health budget. We've never done that before. We give them a cap budget and tell them, look, economise within that cap. So what we're doing in terms of changing the way we think about budgeting and talking about optimising rather than economising, that's the beginning of that shift.
So how heavy-handed will you be as far as setting expectations but also monitoring the activities of the board of Pharmac as far as how well it manages its finances and how well it...
Well, I've always found it's better to be collaborative than heavy-handed, but there's a letter of expectations that will be going to the new board. I've been really pleased to be able to have Paula Bennett, a former Deputy Prime Minister. I think that shows how seriously the government is taking Pharmac, and I think you'll see much better performance in the coming years where we have to accept that there's been some grievance towards Pharmac.
What is the dollar value of the options for investment this time?
I couldn't give you that exact figure, sorry.
Are you willing to come anywhere close to meeting that over the term?
I would like to, but the reality is that we're not going to be able to do that, and if we did, the nature of the options for investment list is that they would say, well, now that we've funded those, we need to generate new options.
Minister, how are you funding that $6 billion over 4 years? Are you looking to cut anything else to pay for this?
Well, the government right across, just to be clear, it's 1.774 billion over 4 years, so it's about 445 million a year. But it's certainly true that in practically every area of government activity, we are looking to find savings. For example, in health, the disestablishment of the Māori Health Authority will help make backroom savings in the Ministry of Health, along with other savings across the Health Ministry. We're doing similar things in education. You'll see so-called contestable funds where the government hands out money on the basis of achieving this or that through a third-party organisation. You see a reduction in those. So there's no one thing that is being changed in order to fund Pharmac, but I think what we're doing today sums up what the government is having to do across the board, which is look for things that aren't delivering for people right now and prioritise those things that are, such as funding pharmaceuticals.
So job losses at the Māori Health Authority will,
Sorry?
so job losses at the Māori Health Authority will help fund this?
Well, it's an example of, I could give you reductions in expenditure in the Ministry of Education administration. We could talk about MB, we could talk about a whole range of departments where we're reducing expenditure. I think people often want to say, well, what exact dollar was saved and where did it end up? The reality is that we need the government to balance its budget as rapidly as possible, and that means a combination of reprioritising to spend on things like this where we're in big trouble, and also it means increasing expenditure, and also reducing expenditure in areas where we can't really show that there's a benefit to people right now.
Do you have confidence in Sarah Fit?
Look, ultimately the Chief Executive is somebody appointed by the board, so it's their confidence rather than mine that matters. But certainly in the interactions I've had with her, I've found her to be very diligent and professional. Her future will depend, on her, what she wants to do, and ultimately on the board.
But the Minister's confidence in a Chief Executive does matter, so do you have confidence in Sarah Fit?
Well, for what it's worth, yes I do, but I just make the point, it's ultimately I appoint a board that is responsible, for that appointment.
Do you agree broadly that the amount of money the government spends on medicines and on care is a good sign of the work of the government, of what it can do for citizens?
Yeah, I do. Ultimately, I think what's more important is the outcomes that we get for patients. And then people will say, well, how many operations do you do? Actually, it'd be better if we didn't have to do any operations because everybody was healthy. So let's not lose sight of the fact that health is the real goal here, but yes, the amount of outputs that come out of the health system, how quickly you can see your GP, how many people get vaccinated, how many people get an operation and what wait time, all of those things matter, and the amount of money that goes in is connected to that. But I think one thing the previous government got wrong is they often thought the way for a government to show its aroha was to throw money at a problem. Often that meant that costs increased, but the actual efficiency and outputs didn't.
On
Minister.
fiscal pills, are you able to say that this budget won't have fiscal pills in other areas? It may have a big virtue in this particular fiscal pill, but it appears there's a bit of a bunch of
Well, no, as far as I'm aware, that there will not be fiscal cliffs in the 4-year period in other areas. Obviously, there are always people who will make arguments about was it realistic to think that this cost would fall away. The point I make is it was never plausible to say that you could drop pharmaceutical expenditure from 1.475 to 1.130. That's what, $445 million drop, and that would not have an effect?
Just on that, the opposition will argue that it proposed during the election campaign that it was going to increase it by about 240 million in the first couple of years and then 280 in the next two. You showed the graph in there that didn't include that. Do you think that that honours your commitment not to politicise Pharmac and its funding?
Well, to be fair, if I'd included every political party's election manifesto and had all the lines there, I think that would have really been politicising it. What I've presented is the official government figures from the Treasury that we inherited when we came into government, and the official government figures that we will release in the budget on May 30. We can have the debate about different political parties. You can ask about the National Party's manifesto, the Labour Party's manifesto, ACT's alternative budget. That actually would be politicising it.
Minister, I'm sure people with diabetes would have been really pleased to hear you talk about including, the general cost of the health system in terms of how we value treatments, because that's been one that, earlier intervention and better medicines can drastically improve someone's life. Is that is it diseases like that you're thinking about when you're making these comments?
Well, yes, but also I'm just hasten to say that I'm not here to decide exactly which things that they should fund. I certainly often give examples of things that Pharmac can fund or not fund and the difference that it makes, and it's certainly true that 18,000 people out there with type 1 diabetes will be very pleased to see continuous glucose monitors added to Pharmac's list. So if you've known anyone, I met a woman just the other day who said that she has been taking finger pricks and injecting herself with insulin for 55 years. She showed me her fingers, and you can imagine what that would do to you over that period of time. So it's fair to say that there's a lot of people who are going to be very happy to have that kind of facility available, particularly because even when people can afford the device, it's the consumables that get them.
Does this announcement today mean that is it for Pharmac in this year's budget, or is there still the option for those cancer drugs to be funded out of this year's budget?
Well, there's always an option, but that's the rest of the budget process, and I am just a mere Associate Finance Minister. I have to...
Control of the Pharmac portfolio.
True, but not one who is in charge of the schedule of budget announcements.
So this whole thing is about bettering access to medicine, but the people that are now having prescriptions for free are worried that they're going to lose that access when these cancer medicines are funded. You've said that that's how you're going to fund them. Are you still committed to that?
Well, again, there's going to be further announcements around what we do with the co-payment. Obviously, some parties making up the coalition campaigned on reintroducing that. Others didn't. All I can say at this point is I think the government has come to a very sound position on where we go with co-payments and the effects that will have both on the revenue and the expense for pharmaceuticals.
So it's likely to see that co-payment come back?
Well, again, I have to, as part of this whole process, have to wait for the schedule of announcements that come out through the budget, but I think we've got to a really good place on that issue.
Should people that are really, really stressed about having to pay heaps for their prescriptions just have to wait for some silly political thing, like delaying an announcement if you've already made it?
Well, I don't think it's silly. The facts are that every government has a lot of information to communicate when it brings down a budget spending $140 billion. There's never been the case that they're expected to announce every single decision at once. I think if we did it that way, people might complain that important details had got lost.
Can you clarify whether you were consulted or informed about the sacking of Ms. Lee incident and whether you support the decision?
Well, first of all, certainly informed about it. The way I look at it, the National Party has a bunch of ministerial posts within the government, and how they manage that within a coalition is up to them.
So
do you think that...
If, say, there was a particular issue that informs an act or is an increased situation, how would you go about dealing with that? And what is Chris Luxon's authority over that? that situation, hypothetical situation?
Well, like I say, it's hypothetical. If you look at Andrew Hoggard and Karen Shaw and Nicole McKee, then I think it's hard to imagine such a situation occurring. You look at what Brooke Van Velden's achieving.
Can you just talk us through the process of that? If an ACT Party minister gets himself in trouble, it's a sackable offence. Is that your responsibility? Is it the Prime Minister's responsibility? Would you expect to have sign-off on that decision before the Prime Minister pulls the trigger?
Oh, well, there's no way that I would expect another party leader to unilaterally sack an ACT minister. That would be a breach of the faith in the coalition agreement. That would be a major problem, but nor would I expect Chris Luxon to behave in that way, because we are uniformly collegial in the way we work together, and that's why, to the great irritation of our opponents, we're getting so much done.
Are you uniformly collegial in the way that we work together? What happened when you got back from Asia?
We had a really collegial discussion with great uniformity, so I would argue that...
Was it heated?
No, I wouldn't have said so.
Was it robust?
I don't know, maybe it's time to get out a thesaurus for a news hub, but I think it was a collegial discussion.
Do you agree with the comments in question about the Waitangi Tribunal were ill-considered? That's his, Chris Luxon's terminology.
No, I don't agree with that, and I've said as much before.
When it comes time to do a broader government reshuffle instead of portfolios, will ACT be in the mix, or will you say these are portfolios under the agreement, hands off, like you get to decide?
I think it really depends on what it is that the people need from the government and how we're delivering it. So at the moment, I really think ex-ministers are knocking it out of the park. It's hard to see why you would want to move any of them. On the other hand, you get a year down the track, maybe there'll be new challenges, new opportunities, and you'd get into a discussion about making some changes. Yeah, look, I mean, basically the way I see it is that we have a coalition of three parties that work together collegially. In some aspects, the decisions remain with the parties. In others, we join together and we work collegially. It's Goldie. Oh, well, I always stand up for my constituents. The only problem is Melissa Lee lives in Epsom too.
Do you accept they might need an operating expenditure investment to become more efficient?
Well, no. I mean, what I understand is that the operating aspect of their operations is operating aspect of their operations. What I understand is that their operating budget is extremely lean and efficient. They're very good at what they do, and the percentage of their revenue that goes into actually operating Pharmac is a tiny percentage, around 3% of their overall revenue. If there was ever a possibility where they said, look, if we could invest in this or that, we think we could save money in the long term, well, that's what investment's about. We'd consider it, but there's nothing like that on the table right now. All right. Well, I completely agree that they need to be faster, but again, sometimes the attitude is, look, if you want to solve a problem, tip in more resources. Frankly, we've tried that. We're broke. What we need to do is figure out how to take a leaf out of Sir Ernest Rutherford's book and say, what if we didn't have much money, so we had to think.
If we're broke, why are you spending $15 billion on tax cuts?
Well, you actually can't spend money on tax cuts as a government because the money belongs to the people. You can't spend money that you're not taking.
Why are you appropriating $15 billion worth of tax cuts?
You can't appropriate money that you haven't actually got. The money belongs to the people, and this government is letting them keep it. Now we're getting somewhere.
If we're broke, why are you reducing government revenue?
Because actually households and businesses up and down this country are hurting like hell, and this government is going to let them keep a relatively small amount of their own money extra. I think after pumping households for more and more cash year after year, that is the only responsible thing to do. Alrighty, folks, I'm happy to...
It's a meaningful tax cut.
Well, it's actually...
meaningful.
Well, unfortunately, if you look at how tough the circumstances that people face are today, what to some people might seem like a small amount is meaningful. So there'll be some. No, there'll be some who say it's a small amount. There's others who say it's meaningful. There's others who will actually jump for joy at getting this extra money.
It's going to be meaningful.
Well, and I agree. So. So there you go. Meaningful, a small, meaningful and massive amount all at once. It's a matter of opinion. We'll see you later.
Yeah.